I first noticed something was different about Sarah on a Wednesday evening in March. The Boston spring was trying its best to emerge from winter's grip, and I'd come home early from the architecture firm to surprise her. After 12 years of marriage, spontaneity had become a rare commodity, but I was determined to change that. The house was quiet when I walked in, though Sarah's car sat in the driveway. Our modest colonial home, the one we'd saved for during my struggling years as a junior architect, and her climb up the corporate ladder at the tech startup, felt different somehow. Colder. "Sarah," I called out, setting down the takeout from her favorite Thai place. No answer. I found her in our home office, laptop closed but still warm on the desk. She was staring out the window at our neighbor's cherry tree, the one she'd always envied. When she turned, there was a moment, brief but unmistakable, where surprise morphed into something else. Disappointment? Annoyance? After 12 years, I thought I knew all of Sarah's expressions, but this one was new. "Oh, hey Mason," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You're home early. Thought I'd surprise you." I held up the takeout bag. Pad Thai, extra peanuts. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet, but I already ate. Conference call ran late. Ordered delivery." I stood there, holding our former favorite meal, feeling oddly like an intruder in my own home. The distance between us, barely 10 feet of beige carpet, suddenly felt vast. Sarah turned back to the window, her shoulders tense. "The Jackson's cherry tree is blooming early this year," she said softly. "We could plant one," I offered, like I had every spring for the past 5 years. "Maybe." She picked up her phone, checking it with an intensity that seemed excessive. "I need to finish some work. Rain check on dinner?" As I retreated to the kitchen to box up the cooling noodles, I tried to shake off the unease settling in my stomach. Sarah had always been dedicated to her work. It was one of the things I admired about her, but something about this felt different. Wrong. I didn't know it then, but that Wednesday in March was the beginning of the end. The moment when the first hairline crack appeared in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and myself. The next few weeks felt like walking on shifting sand. Sarah's schedule became increasingly unpredictable. She'd always worked late occasionally, but now it was different. Her urgent meetings seemed to multiply, often accompanied by lengthy phone calls in our backyard, her voice too low to hear through the kitchen window. I tried to be understanding. Her startup was growing rapidly, and with growth came pressure. But something about it fell off, like the time I brought her coffee one morning and she quickly minimized her laptop screen, or how she'd started changing her phone's position whenever she set it down, always face down now. "You've been working so hard lately," I said one Sunday morning, watching her check emails in bed. "Maybe we should plan a getaway? That bed and breakfast in Vermont you loved." Sarah's fingers paused over her phone. "I don't know, Mason. This quarter is crucial for the company. Maybe in the fall?" The fall. Everything was becoming maybe in the fall lately. I rolled over, studying her profile in the soft morning light. Her dark hair was shorter now. She'd cut it 2 weeks ago without mentioning it beforehand. It looked good, but different. Professional. Polished. Like the new clothes she'd been buying, sleeker and more expensive than her usual style. "Remember when we used to do nothing on Sundays?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just stay in bed, order obscene amounts of Chinese food, and binge-watch bad TV?" She smiled, but it was distracted, her eyes still on her phone. "We were younger then. Things change. Do they have to?" Finally, she looked at me. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Sadness? Before she leaned over and kissed my cheek. "I have brunch with Jennifer. Marketing strategy meeting. Rain check. Another rain check." They were piling up like autumn leaves, unaddressed and gathering weight. As I watched her get ready, a new dress I didn't recognize, more makeup than usual for a Sunday, I felt that unease from the Thai food night creeping back. Jennifer was their head of marketing, sure, but since when did marketing meetings happen over mimosas on Sunday mornings? I wanted to ask more questions, but I was afraid of the answers. Or maybe I was more afraid that she wouldn't answer at all. That night, sleep eluded me. Sarah's steady breathing beside me felt like a mockery of intimacy. So close physically, yet somehow miles apart. I found myself studying the shadows on our bedroom ceiling. each one a different memory stretching back through our years together. There was the shadow of our first apartment, a cramped studio where we'd squeeze past each other in the tiny kitchen, laughing at our synchronized dance of domestic life. The shadow of Sarah's face when I landed the job at the firm, her pride so genuine it made my chest ache. The shadow of countless Sunday mornings, tangled in these same sheets, planning futures that seemed as solid as stone. Now those shadows felt like photographs fading in harsh sunlight. I turned my head, watching Sarah sleep. In repose, she looked like my Sarah again, the one who used to leave post-it notes with silly drawings in my lunch. The one who danced badly to 80s power ballads while doing dishes. The one who knew me better than I knew myself. But lately, I'd catch glimpses of someone else wearing my wife's face. Someone who checked her phone under the table during dinner. Someone who no longer shared the small details of her day. Those tiny threads that, woven together, made up the fabric of a shared life. "I miss you," I whispered to her sleeping form, testing the words in the darkness. They hung in the air, unanswered. The next morning, I found myself doing something I'd never imagined. I checked our phone bill. The rational part of my brain argued this was wrong, a betrayal of trust. But wasn't trust supposed to be mutual? The document loaded slowly, each second stretching like taffy. There was a number I didn't recognize, appearing again and again. Late-night calls, some lasting hours. Text messages in clusters. I closed the laptop, feeling sick. Was I becoming paranoid? Sarah had always been independent. It was one of the things I loved about her. She didn't need to report her every movement, every conversation. Yet that number haunted me, a digital ghost in our marriage. I thought about confronting her, demanding answers. But what would that say about me? About us? Instead, I did what I always did. I buried my fears under layers of rationalization. Sarah was busy, successful, growing. Maybe I was the one who needed to change, to give her more space, to trust more blindly. But as I watched her leave for another marketing brunch the following Sunday, wearing perfume I didn't recognize, I wondered if trust without transparency was just another word for willful ignorance. The autumn chill crept into Boston earlier than usual that year, matching the growing coldness in our home. I found myself lingering in my office at the firm, losing myself in blueprints and client meetings, anything to avoid the hollow echo of our evening routine. One night, as rain tapped against the windows like hesitant fingers, Sarah broke our carefully choreographed silence during dinner. "Mason," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision, "do you ever think about what you want from life?" The question hung between us like suspended glass, ready to shatter. I studied her face, searching for the woman who once spent an entire evening planning our hypothetical retirement cottage by the sea. I thought we wanted the same things. I replied carefully, each word feeling like a step across thin ice. The house in the suburbs, maybe kids eventually, that cottage in Maine. She traced the rim of her wine glass, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since our first date. "People change, Mason. Their wants, their needs, everything evolves. And what do you want now?" The question felt dangerous, like opening a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something that looked like guilt, quickly masked by determination. "I need space to figure that out." The word space echoed in my head like a funeral bell. "Space," I repeated, the taste bitter on my tongue. "What does that mean exactly?" "I'm not sure," she admitted, and for the first time in weeks, I heard genuine emotion in her voice. "I just know I feel confined, like I'm playing a role I've outgrown." I thought about the phone number from the bill, the Sunday brunches, the late-night calls. Was this her way of preparing me? Of softening the ground before dropping a bomb that would crater our life together? "Is there?" I started, then stopped, afraid to give shape to my fears. "Is there someone else?" Sarah's response came too quickly, too smoothly. "Of course not. This is about me, about us. I just need time to think." Later that night, I stood in our bathroom, staring at my reflection while Sarah slept. The man looking back at me seemed older, shoulders curved under the weight of unspoken words. On the counter, Sarah's perfume bottle caught my eye, a new scent I didn't recognize, the receipt still tucked beneath it. The price tag read $285. Sarah had always been practical about such things, claiming anything over $50 for perfume was highway robbery. I remembered her exact words from years ago. If someone's close enough to smell it, they're close enough to matter. And the people who matter don't care what you smell like. I picked up the bottle, turning it in my hands. Somewhere in Boston, someone cared very much what my wife smelled like. And I was beginning to understand that all her talk of space and evolution might be nothing more than carefully constructed scaffolding for something far more devastating. The following week brought an unexpected revelation, but not the one I'd been dreading. During my lunch break, I ran into Jennifer, Sarah's supposed Sunday brunch companion, at the coffee shop near my firm. Mason, her surprise seemed genuine, but there was something else in her expression. Pity? Discomfort? How are you holding up? The question struck me as odd. I've fine. Just grabbing coffee between meetings. I hesitated, then added, How was brunch last Sunday? Jennifer's face shifted, confusion clouding her features. Brunch? With Sarah? The marketing strategy meetings? The silence that followed felt like a door slowly closing on everything I'd been trying not to see. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly, then dropped to her coffee cup. Mason, she began, her voice gentle in a way that made my stomach clench. I haven't had brunch with Sarah in months. We've barely seen each other since she switched departments. The world tilted slightly on its axis. Switched departments? She's still in marketing. Jennifer's discomfort was palpable now. She moved to product development 3 months ago, under David Chun. She touched my arm lightly, her eyes full of something I didn't want to name. I should go. Take care of yourself? Okay. I stood there long after Jennifer left, the coffee cooling in my hand. Product development. David Chun. The pieces were there, refusing to form the picture I didn't want to see. That evening, I found myself in our home office, staring at the photos on the wall. Sarah and me in Napa Valley, her head thrown back in laughter as I struggled with the cork. Us dancing at her sister's wedding, her face pressed against my chest. The day we closed on the house, both of us holding the keys like they were made of gold. My fingers traced the edge of her desk, lingering on a small black notebook I'd never seen before. I shouldn't open it. Trust was trust, even when it felt like sand slipping through my fingers. But trust had brought me here, hadn't it? Trust had become the very thing keeping me blind. The notebook's pages were filled with her precise handwriting. Meeting notes mostly, project timelines. And there, between budget numbers and product specs, a small doodle in the margin, DC with a tiny heart. The same initials appeared again pages later, this time beside what looked like hotel reservations. The Marriott, downtown Boston. Next Tuesday. I closed the notebook, my hand steady despite the tremor in my chest. The truth was taking shape now, clear as the cherry blossoms outside our window. But knowing and confronting were different beasts entirely. That night, watching Sarah get ready for bed, her movements precise, practiced, distant, I realized that sometimes the most devastating betrayals aren't the ones that explode our world. They're the ones that erode it slowly, like water on stone, until one day you look down and find yourself standing on the edge of an abyss you never saw forming. That night, sleep was a distant stranger. I lay in bed, hyper-aware of the inches between Sarah and me, each breath a reminder of the growing chasm. The notebook's revelations played on endless loop in my mind, each replay revealing new layers of deception. Around 3 a.m, I slipped out of bed and made my way to our living room. The darkness felt appropriate, a physical manifestation of the shadows I'd been stumbling through. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting strange patterns on the walls, distorting the family photos into unrecognizable shapes. My wedding ring caught the light, and I twisted it absently, remembering the day Sarah slipped it on my finger. In sickness and in health, she'd promised, her voice trembling with emotion. Now I wondered if she'd meant until David Chun. A notification lit up Sarah's iPad on the coffee table. She must have forgotten to take it upstairs. The preview showed an email from HR about department transition paperwork. Another lie exposed. How many more were lurking beneath the surface of our marriage, like mines waiting to detonate? I thought about Jennifer's face in the coffee shop, that look of pity that now made perfect sense. Had everyone known? Had I been the only one blind to the dissolution of my own marriage? The sound of footsteps upstairs made me freeze. Sarah appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, wearing one of my old t-shirts. For a moment, she looked like my Sarah again, the one who used to wake me up with coffee and kisses, who'd leave silly notes in my briefcase. "Mason, what are you doing up?" Her concerns sounded genuine, and that was perhaps the cruelest part. How easily she could still play the role of loving wife while orchestrating this elaborate deception. Couldn't sleep. I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just thinking." She patted over, settling beside me on the couch, close but not touching. "About what?" I could smell that expensive new perfume, faint but present. Had she worn it today? For him? The thought made my stomach turn. "About truth," I said finally. "About how we build our lives on certain foundations, certain beliefs, and what happens when those foundations start to crack." Sarah stiffened almost imperceptibly. In the dim light, I watched her hands, always her tell in poker, as they twisted in her lap. "Mason, do you remember what you said at our wedding?" I interrupted, still staring straight ahead. "About honesty being the cornerstone of love." The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "People change, Mason. Sometimes the person you were and the person you become can't occupy the same space." "And what about the person you promised to be? The one who said, 'Till death do us part'?" The words came out sharper than intended, edged with a bitterness I couldn't quite contain. She stood abruptly, arms wrapped around herself like armor. "I'm going back to bed. You should too. It's late." As she climbed the stairs, I remained on the couch, watching the moonlight shift across our wedding photo on the wall. The smiling couple in the frame looked like strangers now. Naive strangers who believed in forever, who hadn't yet learned that sometimes love dies not with a bang, but with a series of small, calculated deceptions. Morning arrived like an unwelcome guest, harsh sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to blind. My neck ached from hours on the couch, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. In the kitchen, Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, the coffee maker's gurgle providing background noise to our carefully orchestrated dance of avoidance. She'd changed, a sleek black dress I didn't recognize, hair pulled back severely. "Meeting ready, or maybe David ready. I made you coffee," she said, sliding a mug across the counter. A peace offering in ceramic form. I watched the steam rise, remembering countless mornings of shared coffee and dreams. The mug was from our trip to Maine 5 years ago. "Life's better by the sea," it proclaimed in faded letters. We'd bought matching pairs, planning to use them in our future beach cottage. "You didn't have to wait," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "Don't want to be late for product development." The mug paused halfway to her lips. A slight tremor in her hand betrayed her composure. "Mason, Jennifer says congratulations, by the way, on the department switch. 3 months ago, was it?" The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Sarah set down her mug with deliberate care, her knuckles white against the counter's marble. "I was going to tell you," she began, each word measured, rehearsed. "Once things settled, like you were going to tell me about the Sunday brunches that never happened, or the hotel reservations." Color drained from her face, but her voice remained steady. "You went through my things? Funny how that's what concerns you. Not the lying. I couldn't bring myself to name what I suspected. Naming it would make it real." She grabbed her bag, movements sharp with barely contained emotion. "I have meetings all day. We can talk about this later." "Can we? Actually talk? Or will it be more carefully constructed lies?" Sarah paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed against the morning light. For a moment, she looked small, almost vulnerable. Then her shoulders straightened, armor sliding back into place. "Everything isn't as simple as you want it to be, Mason. Life isn't just blueprints and clean lines. Sometimes things get messy. After she left, I sat in the kitchen, staring at our matching mugs. Hers still full, cooling on the counter. Mine un kid. Like everything else in our marriage lately, even this small morning ritual had become a metaphor for disconnect. I pulled out my phone, looking at the hotel information I'd memorized from her notebook. The Marriott. Next Tuesday. A reservation that wasn't meant for me. The architect in me wanted to draw this out, to map the exact moment our foundation began to crack. But maybe there was no single moment. Maybe it was 1,000 tiny fissures, spreading like a web until the whole structure became unsound. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Somehow, designing other people's dream homes felt hollow when my own was crumbling around me. That afternoon, I found myself driving aimlessly through Boston's winding streets, past landmarks that had become chapters in our shared history. The Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated my first promotion. The park bench where she'd comforted me after my father's passing. The coffee shop where we'd planned our future, sketching dreams on napkins between sips of overpriced lattes. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah, working late tonight. Don't wait up. The words blurred on the screen, each letter a fresh wound. Working late. Such an innocent phrase, now loaded with possibilities I couldn't bear to contemplate. I switched off my phone, unable to craft a response that wouldn't betray the storm raging inside me. Eventually, I found myself at the Boston Public Library, our old sanctuary from Sunday afternoon rain. Sarah and I used to spend hours here during graduate school, sharing earbuds and stealing glances across textbooks. Now I sat alone in the reading room, surrounded by stories of other people's lives while mine unraveled quietly around me. An elderly librarian I recognized from our countless visits approached my table. "No Sarah today?" she asked, genuine warmth in her voice. "You two were always such a lovely couple." "Were." The past tense hit like a physical blow. "She's working." I managed the familiar lie-tasting bitter. The librarian nodded, patting my shoulder with grandmotherly affection. "You know, I've been married 43 years. Want to know the secret?" She didn't wait for my response. Separate lives make separate people. Growing apart isn't inevitable. It's a choice we make in tiny increments, day by day. Her words followed me through the stacks as I wandered, fingers trailing along book spines. How many tiny choices had led us here? How many moments had I missed? Too busy drafting other people's dream homes to notice my own foundation crumbling. Near closing time, I found myself in front of a mirror in the men's room, studying my reflection like a stranger. The man staring back looked tired, haunted by questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. When had I become so comfortable with half-truths and careful silences? When had preservation of peace become more important than preservation of truth? My wedding ring caught the fluorescent light, and for the first time I slipped it off. The pale band of skin beneath felt exposed, vulnerable. Like reading the final page of a book you've been desperate to finish, but afraid to end. On the drive home, a memory surfaced. Sarah on our wedding day, radiant in white, whispering, "You're my safe place," during our first dance. The irony twisted in my chest. I'd been so focused on being her safe place that I'd forgotten to make our marriage a safe place for truth. The house was dark when I arrived, Sarah's absence a physical presence in every empty room. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the framed photo on her nightstand. Us in Paris, the Eiffel Tower a blurred backdrop to our happiness. The glass was dusty now, the image slightly faded. Like us. My phone buzzed again. "Sarah, grab dinner with the team. See you later." The team, David Chun. Product development. Each phrase a carefully constructed facade, a piece of the elaborate architecture of deception she'd built around us. I traced the dusty frame of our Paris photo, remembering how she'd insisted on having it printed despite the poor lighting. "It's not about the perfect shot," she'd said then. "It's about capturing the real moment." Now I wondered, when had we stopped living real moments and started performing them instead? The house felt like a museum of dying memories that night. Each room a carefully curated exhibit of what we used to be. I wandered through them like a ghost, touching photographs, running fingers over the throw blanket where we used to curl up for movie nights, breathing in the lingering scent of a life that was slowly slipping away. Sleep remained elusive, so I found myself in my home office, opening my laptop to work on the Williams house plans. Instead, my cursor hovered over our shared cloud storage, the one we'd created for wedding photos and tax documents. Signs of our merged life, our supposed transparency. A new folder caught my eye. PD project files, product development. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked, knowing I was crossing a line, but unable to stop. Inside were dozens of documents, meeting notes, project timelines, and buried among them, a series of calendar invites. Private calendar invites, carefully labeled as team strategy sessions. One was scheduled for tomorrow. Location, David Chen's office. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I opened the window, letting the cool night air wash over my face. The Jackson's cherry tree was visible in the moonlight, its branches bare now, as stripped and exposed as I felt. Sarah's key in the lock startled me from my thoughts. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, a sound that used to make my heart lift, now making it sink. She appeared in the doorway, slightly disheveled, that new perfume hanging in the air between us. "You're still up," she said, surprise and something else, worry, crossing her features. "Couldn't sleep." I kept my voice neutral, though my hands trembled slightly. "How was the team dinner?" She began removing her earrings, small pearl ones I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. The gesture felt like desecration. "Fine. Productive. We're launching a new product line soon." With David Chen? Her hands froze halfway through removing the second earring. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and our carefully measured breathing. "Yes," she finally said, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding mine. "He's leading the project." I nodded slowly, watching her reflection in the window glass. Behind her, our wedding photo hung on the wall, both of us beaming, unaware that happiness could be as fragile as cherry blossoms in winter. "Sarah," I said softly, still facing the window, "do you remember what you said to me the day we bought this house?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Mason, you said it wasn't just a house, it was a promise, a foundation for our future." I turned to face her. What happened to that future? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes futures change. People change. People change, I echoed. Or people reveal who they truly are? She flinched as if I'd struck her. For a moment, I saw a crack in her careful facade. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that polished exterior I'd grown to dread. "I'm tired, Mason. Can we not do this tonight?" As she walked away, I noticed she'd left her second earring on the desk. A small pearl, catching the moonlight. Like tears, like promises, like everything else that was slipping through my fingers. The next morning dawned gray and somber, matching the weight in my chest. Sarah had already left. Another early meeting, another careful evasion. Her coffee mug sat untouched in the sink, lipstick staining the rim in a shade I didn't recognize. Like everything else about her lately, even this small detail felt like a stranger's signature in our home. I found myself drawn to her closet, standing in the doorway of what had become foreign territory. The scent of her new perfume lingered among the clothes, mixing with the familiar lavender of her old life. New dresses hung like sentries among her usual wardrobe, sleeker, more expensive, tags from boutiques we'd never visited together. In the back corner, half hidden behind winter coats, I found a shopping bag I'd never seen. Inside was a dress still wrapped in tissue paper, the receipt tucked into its folds. The date matched one of those team strategy sessions with David Chun. My hands trembled as I carefully replaced everything, maintaining the precise archaeology of deception. Each new discovery felt like another stone added to the weight I carried, another crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. The morning light caught our reflection in her vanity mirror, me standing in her closet, surrounded by the physical evidence of her transformation. The image struck me as absurdly poetic, a husband literally standing among the artifacts of his wife's metamorphosis into someone he no longer recognized. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Might be home late. Big presentation tomorrow. Tomorrow. Tuesday. The Marriott. I sat on the edge of our bed, the one we'd chosen together during happier times, running my fingers over her pillow. A long dark hair caught on my hand, shorter than it should be, the length matching her recent cut. The cut she'd gotten without mentioning it, like so many other small changes that had accumulated into this vast canyon between us. The silence of the house pressed in around me, filled with the echoes of conversations we should have had, truths that should have been spoken. In that moment, I realized that the most painful part wasn't the possibility of what she might be doing. It was the certainty of what we had become. Two people performing the roles of husband and wife while living entirely separate truths. I opened my laptop, staring at the calendar invite I discovered last night. Team strategy session, DC's office. The cursor blinked accusingly, each flash a reminder of choices made and truths avoided. My finger hovered over the forward button. I could send it to her, force the confrontation we'd been dancing around. Instead, I closed the laptop. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we have to let others reveal in their own time. But as I stepped out of her closet, carefully closing the door on the evidence of her double life, I made a decision. Tuesday would come, and with it, the truth, whether we were ready for it or not. Monday night stretched before me like a dark river, each hour pulling me closer to a truth I both craved and dreaded. Sarah worked late again, her absence a physical ache in the quiet house. I sat in our darkened kitchen, nursing a glass of the wine we bought in Napa Valley, saved for special occasions. What could be more special than the eve of your life's unraveling? The glass caught the moonlight, casting red shadows on the granite countertop. Like blood, like warnings, like all the signs I'd chosen to ignore. Sarah's iPad chimed softly from the living room. She'd forgotten it again, a carelessness that seemed deliberate now. A calendar reminder glowed on the screen. 2 p.m., strategic planning meeting. The Marriott's address blinked beneath it, a digital confession. I remembered our last anniversary dinner. Just 3 months ago, Sarah had seemed distracted, checking her phone throughout the meal. Work's just crazy right now, she'd said, squeezing my hand apologetically. Now I wondered if she'd been messaging him even then, planning rendezvous while pretending to review spreadsheets. The front door opened, bringing with it the scent of rain and her new perfume. Sarah's heels clicked against the hardwood, hesitant, like she was approaching a stranger's house rather than her home. Mason, her voice wavered when she saw me sitting in the dark. Why are you still up? I studied her silhouette in the doorway. The woman I'd married would have crossed the room, kissed my cheek, asked about my day. This new Sarah stood frozen, one hand still on her purse strap, ready for flight. Remember when we used to talk? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Really talk, not just exchange carefully edited versions of our days. She set her purse down slowly, like dismantling a bomb. Mason, I'm exhausted. Can we not? Big day tomorrow. I interrupted, watching her face in the dim light. The presentation. At the Marriott. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's hands, always her tell, twisted together briefly before she forced them still. How did you? Does it matter? I took another sip of wine, letting its warmth spread through my chest, a poor substitute for the comfort I used to find in her presence. What matters is that you're planning to lie to me. Again, like you've been lying about the department switch, the Sunday brunches, the late meetings. It's not, she started then stopped, recalibrating. Things are complicated. No, I said softly, standing up. Things are actually very simple. We've just made them complicated by wrapping them in layers of lies. I moved to the sink, pouring out the remaining wine. You know what's funny? I keep thinking about our wedding vows. I promised to be faithful and honest. Such simple words, such impossible promises, apparently. Sarah's breath caught, a small, broken sound in the darkness. Mason, please. Please what, Sarah? Please don't notice? Please don't ask? Please don't make you face what you're doing to us. I turned to face her fully. Or please don't be here tomorrow when you're meeting David Chun at the Marriott. The name hung between us like a drawn weapon. Sarah's face, illuminated by moonlight, showed a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, guilt, fear, and something else. Relief, maybe. Relief that the charade could finally end. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I watched Sarah prepare for her presentation through the bathroom mirror, each gesture a study in careful deception. The way she applied her makeup with practiced precision, the extra attention to her hair, the deliberate selection of that new dress. All pieces of armor for a battle I wasn't supposed to know about. "I might be late tonight," she said, adjusting her necklace, the sapphire pendant I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. The sight of it against her throat felt like a betrayal in itself. The client dinner might run long. I watched her reflection, wondering how many lies she'd told while wearing that necklace. How many times she'd touched it while crafting elaborate stories about work meetings and strategy sessions. The morning light caught the gem, sending blue shadows dancing across her collarbone. Beautiful and deceptive, like everything else about this moment. "The Marriott has good restaurants," I said quietly, watching her fingers freeze on the clasp. "For client dinners, I mean." Time seemed to stop, crystallizing around us like amber. In the mirror, I saw the exact moment her carefully constructed facade began to crack. A slight widening of eyes, a barely perceptible tremor in her hands, the way her breath caught. Tiny tells I'd learned to read over 12 years of marriage. "Mason." Her voice was barely a whisper, heavy with something between fear and relief. "Don't." I turned to face her directly, no longer willing to watch this play out through reflections. "Just don't lie. Not about this. Not anymore." She gripped the bathroom counter, her knuckles white against the marble. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to understand that the woman I married has been disappearing piece by piece, replaced by someone I barely recognize." I stepped closer, close enough to smell that new perfume, the one she'd never worn for me. Long enough to realize that every late meeting, every Sunday brunch, every business call has been carefully crafted fiction. Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were for me, for us, or for the elaborate deception crumbling around her. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Sarah?" What possible explanation could make sense of the lies, the secret meetings, the hidden hotel reservations? My voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of pain I'd been trying to contain. What story could possibly justify systematically dismantling everything we built together? She reached for me, then let her hand fall away, a gesture that seemed to encompass all our recent months of near touches and almost truths. "I never meant to." "To what? To hurt me? To destroy us? Or just to get caught?" The questions hung between us like shards of broken glass. "You're meeting him today, aren't you?" "David Chun. At the Marriott. At 2 o'clock. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallor that made her look almost ghostly in the morning light. Her silence was answer enough. The Marriott lobby stretched before me, a cathedral of marble and muted conversations. I'd arrived early, choosing a seat that offered a clear view of the elevators while remaining partially hidden behind a large decorative plant. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, each heartbeat sending ripples of pain through my chest. 1:45 p.m. Sarah would arrive soon, wearing that new dress, carrying that expensive perfume like a banner of her transformation. I watched business people stream through the revolving doors, each click of heels against marble making my pulse quicken. Then I saw him first, David Chun, tall, confident, younger than I'd imagined. He carried himself with the easy assurance of someone used to taking what he wanted. My architects, I noticed details I didn't want to see. His perfectly tailored suit, the expensive watch, the way he checked his reflection in the polished elevator doors. 1:55 p.m. Sarah entered through the revolving door, and my world tilted on its axis. She looked beautiful in a way that felt like a weapon, each careful detail of her appearance a deliberate choice for someone else's eyes. Our eyes met across the lobby, a moment of pure, crystallized horror as she realized I was there. The color drained from her face. David Chun, noticing her frozen stance, turned to follow her gaze. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by something that looked almost like pity. I stood slowly, my legs feeling oddly disconnected from my body. The space between us seemed to stretch and contract, years of marriage collapsing into this single, devastating moment. Mason. My name fell from her lips like a broken promise. Please, I can explain. Can you? My voice sounded distant, hollow. Can you explain the months of lies? The careful deceptions? The elaborate storylines you created while dismantling everything we built? Davidson took a step forward, and something inside me snapped. Don't! The word came out sharp enough to make him freeze. This isn't about you. Not really. This is about the death of something that was supposed to be sacred. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. The designer one she'd bought 3 months ago, probably for these very meetings. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen, Sarah? What was your plan? Keep living our carefully choreographed lie until, what? Until you'd figured out your exit strategy? Until you'd completely hollowed out our marriage from the inside? Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing the makeup she'd applied so carefully this morning. I never meant to hurt you, but you did mean to lie to me. Every day, every night, every moment you constructed this parallel life. I pulled out my wedding ring, studying it in the filtered sunlight. You know what hurts the most? Not the affair, though God knows that's devastating enough. It's the systematic destruction of trust. The way you turned our home into a stage set for your performances. The way you wore our memories like costumes while building something new with him. The lobby had grown quiet, other guests pretending not to notice the drama unfolding. David Chun stood awkwardly to the side, a supporting actor in a play he hadn't expected to perform publicly. I loved you, I said softly, each word weighted with grief. Not the person you pretended to be, not the role you played, the real you, or at least who I thought was the real you. Now I don't even know if that person ever existed. The drive home from the Marriott felt like navigating through a dream world, every familiar street transformed by the weight of what had transpired. Sarah's tears, David's uncomfortable shuffle, the pitying glances from strangers in the lobby, all of it swirled in my mind like leaves caught in an autumn storm. I found myself parked outside our house, unable to go in. From here, it looked exactly the same as it had this morning. The same cream-colored siding, the same carefully tended garden, the same Jackson's cherry tree casting shadows across our lawn. But like a stage set after the final curtain, its familiar facade now seemed hollow, its warmth artificial. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Sarah's name flashing on the screen like warning lights, each message more desperate than the last. Please come home. We need to talk. It's not what you think. Please let me explain. Mason, I'm so sorry. Please. Sorry. Such a small word for such monumental destruction. I switched off my phone, letting silence envelop me like a blanket. In the growing dusk, memories played across my windshield like an old film reel. Sarah and me painting the living room, arguing over shade cards, but ending up in a paint fight. The Christmas, she surprised me with architectural drafting tools, each one carefully chosen. The night we slow danced in our kitchen at 2 a.m. just because we could. Each memory now felt tainted, like photographs damaged by water, the edges blurring, colors running together, truth and deception becoming indistinguishable. How many of our moments had been real? How many had been performances, acted out while she crafted her escape route? A light came on in our bedroom window. Sarah's silhouette appeared, pacing. Even from here, I could imagine her hands twisting together, that nervous habit I'd once found endearing. Now just another tell in her elaborate game of deception. The worst part wasn't the affair itself, though that cut deep enough. It was the realization that while I'd been living our marriage, she'd been curating it, selecting which parts to preserve, which to discard, which to use as cover for her parallel life. Every late meeting, every business trip, every work emergency now felt like carefully placed props in a production I hadn't known I was part of. I touched my bare ring finger, the indent still visible, a pale reminder of promises made and broken. The gold band sat heavy in my pocket, no longer a symbol of eternal love, but a relic of something that had perhaps never truly existed as I believed it did. As darkness settled over our neighborhood, I finally understood. Sometimes the deepest betrayals aren't in the act itself, but in the thousand small deceptions that pave the way to it. Every lie, every evasion, every carefully crafted story had been a brick in the wall she'd built between us, until we were living on opposite sides of a divide too wide to bridge. In the end, I didn't go home that night, or the next. Instead, I found myself at a small hotel by the harbor, watching boats sway gently in their moorings as dawn painted the sky in watercolor shades of healing. My wedding ring sat on the bedside table, catching early morning light like a forgotten promise. Sarah's messages had eventually stopped, replaced by a single email that waited in my inbox like an unexploded mine. I never planned for any of this to happen. The truth is, I lost myself somewhere along the way. In our routine, in our comfortable silence, in the life we'd built that felt more like a beautiful cage than a home. David wasn't the cause. He was a symptom of something that had been breaking long before he entered the picture. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for understanding. I just want you to know that the love we had was real, even if the person I became wasn't. I read it multiple times, each word etching itself into my memory like frost on glass. The architect in me wanted to analyze it, to break down its structure and find the flaws in its foundation. But the husband, the man who had loved her through 12 years of shared dreams and synchronized breaths, that part of me just felt tired. Bone deep, soul-consuming tired. The Jackson's cherry tree would be blooming soon. Sarah had always wanted one of our own, but we'd never gotten around to planting it. Now I understood why. You can't grow roots in soil you're planning to abandon. I spent the next few days reconstructing our marriage in my mind. Not as I'd lived it, but as it must have been, the subtle shifts in her behavior, the gradual withdrawal, the way she'd started treating our home like a hotel, present but never fully there. The signs had been there all along, written in a language I hadn't known to read. A week after the Marriott, I finally returned home. Sarah had moved most of her things out, leaving behind only what we'd bought together. Physical remnants of a shared life now ended. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if secrets had weight and their absence created a new kind of space. In my bedroom, I found her wedding ring on the dresser, placed carefully beside a photo of us in Paris. On the back of the photo, she'd written, "I'm sorry I couldn't be who you thought I was, or who I thought I could be." The strange thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break the present. It reaches back through time, altering memories, reshaping the past until you're not sure what was real and what was carefully crafted fiction. But standing there, surrounded by the artifacts of our unraveled life, I realized something important. The love I'd given had been real. The trust I'd extended, the dreams I'd shared, the person I'd been in our marriage. Those things were authentic, even if her responses hadn't been. That night, I sat in our garden, watching the stars emerge like distant truths. The Jackson's cherry tree cast lace-like shadows across the lawn, its branches reaching towards something just out of grasp. I thought about Sarah's email, about losing oneself in the comfort of routine, about love that's real but not enough. Perhaps that's the real lesson in all of this. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of the story you thought you were living and finding the courage to write a new one. Not as a victim of betrayal, but as the author of your own next chapter. I took off my wedding ring one final time, feeling its weight in my palm. Then I did something I'd been afraid to do since that day at the Marriott. I opened my laptop and started designing. Not someone else's dream home, but my own. A new space, built not on the ashes of betrayal, but on the foundation of hard-won wisdom and self-discovery. The first feature in the plans? A cherry tree in the backyard. Not because it reminded me of Sarah, but because sometimes the things we want most belong solely to us, not to the shadows of our past. If you like the vid, please follow to the channel, and don't forget to like the video. See you soon.